Is this the most bizarre painting you've ever seen? It just might be. What you see is an abundance of grotesque masks, skeletons, drunken clowns, marching bands, banners, a little vomit, and one small, nearly invisible Christ. In just a little detail, this painting is 4.3 meters wide and over 2.5 meters tall. This fascinating work of art is titled Christ's Entry into Brussels in 1889, and it was painted by James Ensor in 1888. He was a Belgian artist of English descent, and his peculiar paintings served as major influences on the Expressionist and Surrealist movements. At first glance, this huge painting is extremely chaotic, noisy, crowded, and straight up overwhelming. But once you start looking closely, you can't stop, and you simply have to figure out what you're looking at. Every part of this monster painting is packed with madness, and most importantly, mockery. At the center of it all is Christ himself, riding a donkey, and entirely ignored by the countless people who surround him. This isn't your average religious painting though, but the Jesus figure is quite significant when you start analyzing this work. He's even directly linked to the mob of costumed fools, politicians, bureaucrats, and carnival revelers marching through a twisted version of Brussels. And then there's the remarkable story of how it ended up at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, which caused quite a stir in Ensor's native Belgium. But first of all, let's take a look at the painter, James Ensor, because that's very much needed to understand why he painted this beautiful monstrosity. I first came across Ensor as a little child when I first laid eyes upon the 100 Belgian francs banknote. On it, he was depicted alongside the peculiar masks he painted so often, and at the time, I never really figured out why. Born in 1860 in Ostend, Belgium, Ensor lived most of his young life above his family's souvenir and curiosity shop. The shelves of this store were filled with carnival masks, puppets, fake skeletons, and the occasional seashell. And if you're wondering where he got his taste for the surreal masks that define many of his paintings, then you don't need to look much further. Despite his strange technique, he was trained as a classical painter at the Royal Academy in Brussels, but he quickly grew bored with the traditional style. By the 1880s, Ensor was part of the Belgian avant-garde group Les Ex, and he started exhibiting his peculiar paintings in 1881. But even among experimental artists, James Ensor was kind of a weirdo. His paintings got rejected and his style was dismissed by his colleagues, something that only fueled his rebellious nature. Christ's entry into Brussels was perceived as so outrageous that it wasn't even shown publicly until decades after he painted it. After the turn of the century, he hardly painted anything original anymore and rather dedicated himself to his other passion, music. The paintings he completed during the final decades of his life were mere spin-offs of works he completed during his prolific period of the 1880s and 1890s. He barely traveled and consistently did his daily walk in his native Ostend, even when he risked being bombed during World War II. Yes, James Ensor was definitely a peculiar individual, and this painting embodies this notion. So let's look closer at this monumental work of art, for convenience's sake, starting from the top. Here you can see a massive red banner unfurl across the painting, reading Vive la Sociale. This means long live the social, a jab at socialist movements and mass populism. This is a key element in this painting, since in 1886 there was a mass socialist rally in Brussels, and Ensor surely saw the newspaper of the crowd. This still doesn't explain the Christ figure, and that's the second key to understanding this painting. Socialist politicians at the time used Jesus Christ as their main example to convey the message of socialist reforms. Ensor painted the socialist Émile Littré, who was actually an atheist, wearing a bishop's clothes while beating a drum. This contradiction is the reason why the Christ figure appears so minuscule in a sea of grotesque figures. We shouldn't assume, though, that James Ensor was anti-socialist. In fact, he was in favor of social reforms that would benefit the lives of impoverished people. James Ensor simply left mocking everyone, and Christ's entry into Brussels in 1889 was his ultimate expression. Just below the banner, there's a band of skeletons and masked buffoons playing brassy instruments, as if they were some kind of haunted marching band. They seem to be leading the charge, so the question popped into my mind, toward what exactly? Their faces are exaggerated, cartoonish, and lifeless, as they appear to be more masked than human. That's not an accident. Ensor believed society was full of people who wore masks to hide their corruption. Moving to the sides, the crowd grows denser and more grotesque. You'll find caricatures of priests, politicians, doctors, and judges, and they're all cheering with hollow eyes and gaping mouths. Some faces look like actual skulls, others are wearing paper masks, tradition in Belgian carnivals. The message? Society is a circus, and nobody is really watching the ringmaster. And then, buried in the middle of it all, there's Jesus Christ. What's intriguing is that the Jesus figure could be interpreted as a self-portrait. Ensor's Christ isn't commanding attention, he's being ignored, absorbed by the crowd, and practically erased by the chaos around him. Ensor somewhat saw himself as a misunderstood genius who was trampled by the stupidity of the masses. A sign on the right side reads Vive Jésus, Roi de Bruxelles, or Long Live Jesus, King of Brussels. But even that feels sarcastic because this scene can hardly be described as a royal entry. The painting serves more like a warning about blind crowds and the collapse of individual thought. Above the sign, we see a reviewing stand filled with bureaucrats and grotesque officials, staring forward with blank expressions. They represent power, and as you surely expected, he painted them bloated, bored, and completely indifferent. And then, just when you think this painting couldn't get any weirder, you see a man in a bishop's hat vomiting. Upon closer inspection, you can see that Ensor painted the logo of the group he once belonged to just below it, Les Ex. This was actually a later addition, as this figure wasn't included in the original version. It's only when he learned that his painting was rejected for the annual exhibition of Les Ex that he plotted revenge. A man vomiting on the banner of the group was the best thing that James Ensor could come up with at the time. In 1893, he finally left the group, but not before making a clear statement of what he thought about his 20 Belgian colleagues. Now, visually the painting is pretty messy, but that was intentional. He used all sorts of tools to create this work of art, including palette knives, the opposite end of brushes, and even spatulas. Ensor deliberately flattened perspective, used harsh colors, and packed the canvas with detail that overwhelms the eye. If it feels claustrophobic to you, then this means that James Ensor succeeded in what he wanted to achieve with this work. Faces melt into one another, and the number of figures that Ensor included is staggering. And remember, this painting is huge. Standing in front of it, it feels like you're inside it. For decades, the painting wasn't shown publicly, as it remained in the artist's studio in Ostend until 1929. After that, it traveled frequently until it was finally sold for the equivalent of 9 million euros back in 1987 to the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. This sale was about as controversial as the painting itself, since it was considered to be Belgian cultural heritage back then. Today, it still hangs at this incredible museum in LA, and in my opinion, it is one of the museum's ultimate highlights. So to conclude, is this the most bizarre painting you've ever seen? I believe it certainly is a contender. But it's also one of the boldest, strangest, and most brutally honest works of art ever made. Behind the madness of this bizarre marching band, James Ensor left us a warning. His opinion was that human hypocrisy has no boundaries, and that the personal responsibility of large crowds vanishes behind the masks they wear.